That was a great story. Graham slapped him on the back as he walked past. Craig had been so involved in his work that he hadn't noticed him coming up behind him. As a consequence, this shocked him rather more than it might have, and he cried out in surprise, "Jesus, Graham, what the bloody hell?" He grinned at him. His wide ugly lips contorted into a vicious smile. "Great article yesterday," he said again. "I loved it. The headline, 'Woman Runs Over Herself.' Utterly brilliant. For some reason it made me think of my wife, and in a good way for once." "That means a lot coming from the worst editor in the history of the press," Craig said dismissively, his eyes flicking back to the monitor where he was writing yet another article which may, or may not, turn out to be utterly brilliant. "Where do you get this crap?" he said with a sneer, inhaling a long drag on a cigarette, even though having it alight indoors was technically against the law. "I mean, it was the worst kind of tabloid crap, but that's what sells, and I like anything that makes me laugh." "I made it up," Craig told him earnestly. He grinned to himself. "I make up about 90% of the articles I submit to you. You never check them, so it doesn't matter." Graham shrugged. "Well, it doesn't matter. That's why I never check them," he said with an uncharacteristic outburst of honesty, quite unbefitting for anyone working in journalism. "Seriously, I made the whole thing up," he said matter-of-factly. "I mean, we write for one of the worst news websites in the entire Western world. Our audience doesn't come here to be informed. They come here because they don't know how to operate a search engine. I figure we throw out a few apparently interesting articles citing an unnamed victim and no one ever cares, right? Hell, we're doing these semi-literate morons a favour." "Sounds about right to me," Graham agreed. He was a desperately loathsome person and was frequently described as such by his own wife, who had only married him because he drunkenly knocked her up at a party. Why he married her was even more baffling. "But I know you didn't make it up, and it's still a great fit for our business model. Keep writing the same crap that's befitting a journalist of your calibre." "Interesting," Craig said, rubbing his chin. "Why would you think that I didn't make it up? I'm a guy who lost a proper job at a prestigious national news outlet after getting caught with 3 other journalists snorting cocaine off the breasts of a hooker." Graham nodded. "I've always wondered about that. Could you really not tell she was already dead?" "I could not," he told him earnestly. "I'm not a doctor. So with my horrendous grasp on reality and societal norms, why is it so hard for you to believe that I made up a story about a woman who accidentally ran herself over? I mean, I have no decency or moral fortitude whatsoever, let alone journalistic integrity. I even had that on my application for this job." "You used every word in that sentence correctly," Graham told him. "That puts you head and shoulders ahead of most of the garbage we get here." Some of the garbage they got here took an interest in the conversation. A head poked up, belonging to an aging, slender man with long hair that had turned grey while waiting patiently to be properly cut. He had hollowed out red eyes and an uneven goatee beard. "Easy now," he said in a weak protest. "I try my best." "Shut up, Ralph. Smoke some weed and stay out of it," Graham told him. "You shouldn't speak to Ralph like that," Catherine said, the only other journalist in the office. She had the appearance that suggested she was either as inbred as the royal family or had been modelled on a small pony. Graham nodded. "You're right there," he agreed. "That's the way I should speak to you." She grunted and shook her head. Graham beamed a happy smile, taking a moment to enjoy the simple pleasure of insulting his staff. "It's just fiction, I promise you," Craig said with a shrug, looking rather confused about just exactly why his explanation wasn't finding the mark. "I made up a woman who had a flat tyre. She got out of her car, leaving the engine running while she checked on the wheel. By some freak mishap, mixed with her own stupidity, the car rolled over her head, sparing the world from having to deal with one more idiot." "Beautiful," Graham said, gazing out from his twisted thoughts. "That's how I dream my wife will leave me. At least it is now." Graham shrugged. "I promise I made it all up." "But I know you didn't," Graham said with one of his appallingly lecherous smirks. "Mrs. Coulson, mother of one and husband of Bernard Coulson. A tragic death that the police have ruled misadventure, and Bernard described as something of a relief." Craig frowned. "No, Graham, you can't just add made-up names to these things or you'll get us into trouble. The trick is in leaving the details blank to protect the families or whatever crap you feel like making up. You didn't just add some names, did you?" "You can stop messing about now," the editor told him, flicking the still-lit cigarette into a waste paper basket where it smouldered impotently. "I'm not a complete idiot, even if my wife and daughter think I am, and tell me with depressing frequency. I liked your story. You sold it with a compelling headline, and I looked it up to confirm the details just out of interest. It's all there in the police records." "Well done with that one. Keep it up. 5 stories like that a day from you, and I'll make sure you get one of the nicer office chairs." Craig watched as Graham lumbered away, his suit several sizes too small and several degrees too stylish for a man like him. He shook his head and tried to forget that conversation. which to him had seemed even more bizarre than all the attention the media had given to one dead prostitute. He closed his current article, one where the headline read, "Local spaceman says carrots were the key." He opened his browser and began searching for the name that Graham had dropped him. Sure enough, a news article from a far more reputable journalistic resource with the tedious headline, "Roadside Tragedy Claims Mother of One," came up in his search. He rubbed his chin curiously and frowned to himself as he read the details, which entirely mirrored his own work. He began to look quite concerned as he flicked through the facts. "What the hell?" he muttered to himself. "I was sure I made that up." With a mind as addled with various drugs snorted from the breasts of various women, some alive, he could never entirely be sure of what was completely, absolutely and totally real and what was wholly, thoroughly and altogether fabricated. Most of his articles fell somewhere in the middle, although not quite in the centre of the middle. Confused and more interested in all this than in doing his job, he looked over his back catalogue of journalistic triumphs and found a recent story that had blossomed from his fevered imagination with the headline, "Bloke nearly loses left testicle." He smiled as he remembered that one, the tale of a gentleman who had suffered a minor accident in his car, clipping the curb as he went round a corner and then accidentally crashing into a parked vehicle. The jolt of the impact dislodged a glass jar containing his surgically removed gonad, which fell out of the bag and began rolling around in the back. Not wishing for it to end up lost beneath the seat, got out of his car to find it and was instantly killed as a truck hit him. The gonad was later recovered. That one had been inspired by his ex-wife's new boyfriend. The best part of all this is that when he submitted it, Graham had laughed loudly enough for the whole office to hear and had ironically declared, "You couldn't make this stuff up." Searching through the internet, Craig rather disturbingly discovered that the crap he had very much indeed made up had grown from a kernel of truth. A Mr. Groves, who was returning from hospital after an operation to remove a tumour from a very unpleasant spot, had met a fate exactly as described in his own story. "Well, this is weird," Craig said loudly. Along the desk, Catherine, a woman with the moral decency of a shark, said, "What happened? Did you spell everything correctly?" She laughed at her own joke, a hollow guffaw that whistled through her gigantic and misshapen teeth. "Mellow out, guys," Ralph said, his voice oddly grave. "My stories are true," Craig said with a curious frown. She said, "Your stories are meant to be true, you piece of crap. That's not weird, that's your job." "Yeah," he agreed, "but we all know that none of us does our job." "A fair point," she agreed. "So what the hell are you going on about?" "Well, I made up a bunch of stories, most of them in fact," he explained. "You see, I don't care even a little bit. I just make up any old crap that comes into my mind when I'm coming up to a deadline. I know Graham won't care about anything that happens after lunch because lunch is generally served with enough beer to drown a donkey, so none of it matters." "We're journalists," she said with a frown. "We all do that." Ralph nodded in agreement. "It's funny because it's true." Craig held up a hand and said, "But now I'm looking at it, it seems they're actually true. They really happened, exactly as I described them." "So you copied them," she said, sounding like she was only half paying attention. He shook his head and scowled at her. "No, I made them up. I just came up with any old crap and wrote it down. And now I look for it, they're true. But they can't be." She took a swig from a cardboard cup of the world's worst coffee. "It's not how the world works," she told him, citing conventional wisdom. "Things happen and then we write about it, so other people know they happened. It's not the other way around." Craig made a thoughtful expression. "The other way round?" he said with a sarcastic smirk. "Like if we made something up and told people about it and that actually made it true?" "No," she told him. "The world doesn't work that way. We just write the news and people read it while they take a shit. Probably because they couldn't find a decent game to play on their phones. We're not changing the world, Craig, and we're certainly not making it." "Well, here's another one," he said in surprise. "I wrote, 'Council wants to ban politics,' and here it is. A small town wants to remove politics from their decision-making process. It's exactly how I wrote the story." "Idiot," she told him, which seemed fair. "You're just crazy." "Strange things happen, dude," Ralph told him. "One time I had a dream that I was a cat stuck in a washing basket, and then, guess what happened?" Craig frowned, hoping against reason he wouldn't tell them. Shattering his hopes and dreams, he failed not to continue and said, "A dog attacked old Mrs. Kenner on my street, biting her left nipple and knee so badly that she had to have 17 stitches. "What?" Catherine asked, saving Craig the trouble. "You see, I was the cat, and I was watching, but I was scared of the dog, so I hid in the basket and didn't see anything," he explained. "So it really happened as I saw it, except I wasn't looking the right way." "Is that the same thing?" Craig asked, furrowing his brow. "I'm a bit lost." "Well, man," he began, nodding enthusiastically, "to think about whether we report the news or if we make the news. Do we see the world and tell the world what we saw, or do we, like, tell people what happened because it happened. And what happens if it didn't happen before we say it happened? Did it then happen because what happened was that we said it happened? I've got a headache, Craig said. Sorry I asked. Oh, this again, Catherine said with a roll of her eyes. He said this before, something about if enough people believe something, then it becomes real. Ralph said, something like that, man. Something just like that. Think about it. We tell people what to think, what to believe. They don't question us because we're the news. Our job is to give them facts, and their job is to believe the facts. Make enough people believe a thing, and that thing is real. That's why they work so hard at telling the news their way. They know it's true. People make reality, and we make the people think the reality we want them to think. Craig sighed. That headache is getting worse. He turned and stepped over to the corner office and began hammering on Graham's door. He let himself into the office, and before the editor could even react, he said, Something weird is going on here, Graham. Are you still on drugs? He asked, not unreasonably. No, he said forcefully. Not today anyway, you don't pay me enough. You're damn right I don't, Graham said with a wry smirk. Craig took a deep breath. Look, those stories I wrote, I made them up. I just completely made them up. No references, no nothing. Now when I look them up, they really happened and are being reported on other news websites, he said. Did you edit the stories? Did you add fake details? Did you sell my work to other sites? If so, why aren't I getting credit or a slice of the commission? What's going on here, Graham? Graham listened mostly and then said, Are you still on drugs? Seriously? I'm not on drugs, he insisted. But the stories are made up and they're really happening. If you didn't edit them and sell them to one of our competitors, then the things I'm writing are starting to become real. How is that possible, Graham? Get out of my office and go and do some work, the editor told him, and don't you come back here without enough drugs to share with me. Craig left, a gigantic scowl painted on his flushed, reddened face. Catherine said in a condescendingly sarcastic tone as he skulked out back to the main office, What's the matter? You didn't tell him what Ralph said, did you? Craig glared at her. No, I don't want to end up in a straitjacket. She grinned, her monstrous teeth jutting through her lips haphazardly as she did. Don't worry, she told him. I just wrote an article to cheer you up. A balding, overweight, middle-aged journalist died today when a freak set of circumstances led to him being crushed by a falling piano. My headline is, Man Finally Faces the Music. I just submitted it. It'll be out tonight. Craig's eyes widened as she laughed hysterically.
At edgeverse.org, all our books, novels and stories are absolutely free. No sign up, no email and no login required. If you would like to help us grow, please consider subscribing, liking and commenting on our videos. Support independent authors and free publishers in building the future of literature.